Okay guys, we're officially in a new country. We made it to Portugal.
We took a flight the other night from Barcelona to Granada.
Okay, so we're now officially on the road. There's Dennis driving over there. We just got back from a 2-week trip to Spain and Portugal, and we're gonna tell you exactly how much money we spent. Now, if you've seen our YouTube videos before, you might be surprised to hear us say that, because typically we're normally not talking about how we're spending money. We haven't really been big spenders over the last 2-ish years since we've been doing YouTube full time. It's pretty much exactly 2 years this month, actually. So that's kind of a cool milestone. But in that last 2 years, it's been pretty easy for us to stay home and be working a lot. We've been really focused on making more money, first of all, and then also saving and investing our money, and most of our videos typically are talking about that. But we decided this year that we wanted to go on a trip, which means spending a little bit more money, and we wanted to make sure we were sharing that with you guys too, because I think it's really easy, especially as a personal finance channel, to share the good things you're doing with your money. I guess that's kind of saying that spending is inherently bad, but the thing is, ultimately when you're saving and investing your money, you are doing that to one day spend it on specific things. As long as you've budgeted and saved for it, then that's okay too. I'm kind of telling and reminding myself this as well. So in this video, we're gonna break down exactly how much we spent and how we came up with our budget for the trip as well. Now I wanna start by explaining the type of trip that we wanted to take, because obviously there's tons of different types of trips you can take, and based on what you're doing and how long you're going for, all of that, it's gonna impact the budget and the expense of the trip, right? So for us, we knew that we wanted to go somewhere that had multiple things to do. We're not really, at least not at this stage in our lives, sit on a beach and relax type of trip people. We're not really cruise people. We more so want to be able to go somewhere where we're exploring a bunch of different stuff. We're walking around a lot. We like to get our steps in when we're on a trip, kind of get to do a bunch of different stuff all in one place. So that's what we were looking to do. And obviously, if we're going to be doing a trip like that, to an extent, it's gonna be a little bit more expensive already. When you do a beach vacation, right, you can look for a resort package, you can kind of get everything all included. Sometimes that brings your expenses down. In our case, we were doing something that was gonna be international and, I don't know, I guess wasn't gonna be a package. So we knew it was gonna be somewhat more expensive, but we wanted to kind of plan out where we wanted to go, see what was realistic, then set a budget to make ourselves bring down the cost in every single lane that we could. Then for the actual planning, Dennis first did a high level, what cities do we wanna go to, what specific spots and activities are the main things we want to see. And then I came in and did the very specific detailed, what order of places we'd go to, because that's when you can decide on, okay, what's realistic flight options? What are the cheapest we can get? Hotel and accommodations in general, all of the different things that would help us build our budget from there.
Okay, so let's get into the actual expenses, and we're gonna be giving you the totals, so everything is for 2 people. So to give you kind of the overview, we flew from Toronto to Barcelona and we spent 5 days there.
So we just landed in Barcelona. It's 1:00 p.m. right now. We landed at 11-ish, so it took us about 2 hours to get to the hotel, but we're here now.
We then flew from Barcelona to Granada and spent 2 days there.
Okay guys, we made it to a second stop on our trip. We are now in Granada, Spain. It's our second morning. We took a flight the other night from Barcelona to Granada. Pretty smooth. It was a nice, easy flight here. We're super excited to be on stop number 2 of the trip.
From there, we drove from Granada all the way to Seville and spent 3 days there.
All right guys, so we are in Seville right now. I'm obviously on a balcony, Steph is down there. But yeah, it's our 3rd day here. We'll see how things go.
And then finally, we flew from Seville all the way to Lisbon and spent 3 days there.
Okay guys, we're officially in a new country. We made it to Portugal. Specifically, we've been in Lisbon for the last 3 days. This is day 3.
And then after that, we obviously flew from Lisbon all the way back to home to Toronto. Now, the first thing that we booked were flights, because we knew that this was probably gonna be one of our biggest expenses. And really the key here was being flexible with when we were okay with flying in and out of different places. So just in general, the day that you fly in and out of affects the price of your plane ticket. So for us, to give you an example, we literally spent an extra day in Seville because we knew that we were gonna save hundreds of dollars on the flight. And when we compare that to how much we were spending on the Airbnb or a hotel, the additional cost of staying that extra night was heavily outweighed by the savings on the flight itself. So to give you the actual breakdown, our flight from Toronto to Barcelona, that was flown Air Canada, And once again, we usually always try and fly Air Canada whenever we can, just based on location. That's usually where we're gonna earn the most points flying with that airline. But yeah, for us, that flight was $1,455.92. And then our other big flight was Lisbon back home to Toronto, and that was $1,228.70. Now for this last flight, it was really interesting because there was only one ticket that was remaining at the lower price. So me and Steph actually decided to buy those tickets separately. So if you're in a situation where you do have one last ticket, just buy separately, you know, if you can get the cheaper price. Then for our smaller flights, we flew a local airline called Vueling from Barcelona to Granada, and that cost $345.83. And then, you know, Ryanair, we flew that from Seville to Lisbon. I feel like that's a more common one that a lot of people know. But we flew that for $274.09 for a grand total of $3,304.54 spent on all of the flights.
So the next most expensive category that honestly took a lot of time and research for us to book was accommodations. Now for us, we were open to staying in hotels or Airbnbs. We kind of wanted to keep our options open. Our goal overall was to keep it as cheap as possible, but still be like a nice place to sleep. It's a 2-week trip. We don't want our backs hurting too much if we can help it. We also wanted to make sure it was in a good location. We wanted it to be walkable. We didn't want to have to like save money on accommodations, but then Uber into the city for every single thing we wanted to do. For us, basically like 45 minutes and under would have been good for like a walkable location. We don't mind walking a lot. Again, we kind of said that that's what we like to do on a trip, but those were our main considerations. So good place to sleep. Oh, the other thing too is that we wanted to make sure we could keep our luggage there because we were staying in a few different spots throughout the trip, right? We didn't know like for certain mornings, are we getting there really early? In an Airbnb, you might not be able to leave your stuff. So maybe we want to consider hotels. Those were all the things in the back of our mind. Now we ended up landing on hotels for the 2 bigger cities, which is Barcelona and Lisbon. For a few reasons, mostly in those cities, it was harder to find good priced Airbnbs. Again, in the southern Spain cities, so Seville and Granada, we were able to find really good priced Airbnbs. I'll talk about that in a second. But in the bigger cities, the Airbnbs that were in good locations actually were more expensive than the hotels or very similar. And then the other ones were just really far away. And again, same thing for both those bigger cities. We happened to be checking in earlier, so it would have been hard to leave our stuff or bring it around with us. So that's kind of how we landed on it. Now, our most expensive hotel by a decent amount was actually the first one that we stayed at in Barcelona. This location was the one we had the hardest time finding a spot to stay at and finding like a cheaper option as well. Now, there definitely were cheaper options than the hotel that we ended up choosing, but I will say now being done the trip and having stayed in 4 different spots, this was definitely our favorite by far, which is definitely good when you spent more money on it. It was nice for a few reasons. The hotel itself was nice, but one of the biggest things for us is that it had flex check-in and check-out times. So it meant that you could choose when you wanted to check in and when you wanted to check out for no extra charge. So on our last day, we literally chose to check out at 6 p.m., which is basically, for most hotels, you'd have to pay for a whole other night in order to do that. This was no extra charge. We were able to shower before our flight that night. All of that was really nice. So that was a positive, even though it was a little bit more expensive. So let me give you the numbers. We ended up staying at the Hoxton Poblano. The Hoxton's a chain, I guess, of boutique hotels. There's a few of them around the world, but we stayed at the one in Barcelona for 4 nights for a total of $1,236.79, which basically worked out to being $310 a night. So that was hotel number 1 and city number 1. For the next 2 cities, we actually were able to stay in Airbnbs. They were both really great as well. So we stayed in an Airbnb in Granada and Seville. What was also nice is that those 2 cities were the midpoint of the trip, and one of the Airbnbs at least had laundry, which was super great. We were able to do our laundry, dry it with a drying rack overnight. They didn't have a dryer, but they had a washer, which was all we needed. We packed some Tide Pods, did our laundry, loved that. And the Airbnbs were really nice too. They were located well into the center of the city. Sometimes that's an advantage to an Airbnb, is you get an even better location because it's not this big hotel building. They had balconies. We really enjoyed staying at them, which was really nice. And the other positive is that they were much less expensive. I think these cities are less expensive to stay in anyway, specifically Granada, but still nice to get it down from that $300 a night. We don't want to keep in that number. So for these ones, the Granada Airbnb was $561.35 for 3 nights, so about $187 per night. That's with all fees, by the way, the cleaning, this is our total amount. And on top of that one, the Seville Airbnb was $782.67 for 4 nights, which was about $196 per night. So both much more affordable than that first hotel. So the last place we stayed was a hotel in Lisbon. It's kind of funny now that I'm thinking back to all the spots, because I think the first place we stayed was our favorite, and then exactly on from there. The hotel we ended up staying at in Lisbon was a little more expensive, and the hotel was fine, but the beds were the least comfy, unfortunately, of the entire trip, so we kind of didn't avoid the sore back thing at the very end. But it was still good. It was the Moxie Lisbon City, which is a Marriott chain. It's part of their group of hotels. And yeah, again, good for leaving our bags, and allowed us to actually, like, the morning we got there at like 9 in the morning. We left our bags with them all day, so that was definitely still a benefit. Definitely was still a good spot for us to stay. Now, in terms of total price, it was $700.61. We stayed there for 3 nights as well, so it ended up being about $234 a night. So kind of in the middle. So those are the 4 different spots that we stayed in. So our grand total for accommodations for the entire trip was $3,281.42.
Okay, so the other 2 biggest expense categories are transportation and food. So transportation wise, obviously the flights were covered in the sense that those are obviously a really big expense category, but there was also, a bunch of day trips that we did. So what that meant was us going to and from different train stations, and with that also comes Ubers and taxis, right? So even using that to and from the airport, and often if it got really late at night, then we might have taken an Uber or taxi home. So the first day trip that we ended up taking was from Barcelona to Montserrat, and this one was a lot of fun, and me and Steph really enjoyed it. It's one of those day trips that I would highly recommend if you're someone who is traveling to Barcelona. It's about an hour away, and it's in the mountains, and for us it was just really great because there was a lot of different sceneries. You get to see the mountains, you get to hike. The vibes were just really good, and I can't even tell you how much time we spent figuring out how we were actually going to get there, because there's obviously different modes of transportation to get there. You can either drive, you can either take the train, you definitely cannot walk. I think it's like a 4-hour walk if you were to do that. But for us, we literally found this package online that was really affordable and covered all of your different modes of transportation. All you would have to do was get to like the main train station, and then that train station would then get you to Montserrat, at which point you could then take a cable car, which is also covered in the package, all the way up to the actual mountain itself. Overall, it costs $129 for us to both do that day trip, including the train. Now, our next day trip that followed that was Girona. So this is a city that's also just outside of Barcelona as well. But this one was really interesting because we decided to take a high-speed train. So once again, there's different forms of transportation that you could use to get there. You could either drive yourself, there's a bus you could take, or you could take a high-speed train. So for us, the bus was actually cheaper, but in order to save on time and actually optimize our time once we got to Girona, we opted for the high-speed train. So I think the high-speed train takes about 45 minutes in comparison to like the 2 hours that you would be in like traffic on the bus, and you'd have to do that obviously to come back home. Overall, it costs around $90 for 2 round-trip tickets on the high-speed train. Now, our next day trip was to this small beach town called Sitges. It's also just off of Barcelona, and for this one, it was around I think like an hour away, but the train was much cheaper because it was a more local one, and that one cost around $40. Now, our final day trip that we took throughout the entirety of the trip was from Lisbon to Sintra. Now, this one was about 30 minutes on the train or so, just outside of the city, and for this one, it was around $14 it cost us for 2 round-trip tickets, but we did end up, so obviously a lot cheaper, but we did end up spending more on attractions and just different little things that we're doing once we actually got to Sintra itself. Now, on top of the day trips, we actually ended up renting a car to take us from Granada to Seville, and the rental price for the car itself was around $312, and then we had to pay $60 in gas additional on top of that. Now, this one was interesting because we literally had a situation picking up the car. We had a minor accident during our drive. So this one was like a really interesting experience to say the least, but we're gonna be doing a follow-up video where we dive deeper into that, so stay tuned for that video. So overall, the rental car, the train rides, the Uber rides, any taxi affiliated rides as well, cost $1,009.60 in total.
Okay, so now let's talk about food, which is another interesting category to plan for. Obviously, it can get expensive too. I feel like I'm calling every category the expensive category, but food obviously is a big one as well. And it can be kind of harder to budget and plan for because you're not prepaying for it, right? As you go along your trip, it can be easy to let this one get away from you a bit. So there's a few things that we did to try and make sure we're keeping our minds on keeping the food costs slightly lower when we can. We pretty much only went to expensive or somewhat nicer places to eat, specifically dinner too, if it was like the place to go in a specific city. So as opposed to seeking out those types of restaurants, if it was more like, oh, you really gotta go here, maybe it ended up on our list. Even in those scenarios, we did a lot of sharing like meals with each other so we could get multiple tastes of different dishes that way as opposed to ordering a bunch, and also trying to stick to the things that are lower cost on the menu. A lot of menus at places like that have really high options and ones that are more reasonable, so I'm trying to stick to those as well. On top of that, we mostly did 2 meals a day, so a big breakfast and also a dinner, and then kind of snacks in between instead of a lunch. Now, one thing we don't ever want to do is not eat. Food is definitely important, and fueling yourself is important as well. But we found that by doing like a bigger breakfast and dinner, that worked for us. Having snacks when we needed them, and also staying hydrated, I think is a big thing too. A decent amount of our food budget, not actually comparably, but there definitely is some waters in there as well because we wanted to make sure that we were drinking and staying hydrated. So overall on the food category, we ended up spending $1,484.77 for 15 days, which actually ends up working out to being just under $100 a day. Now the last few categories are attractions and souvenirs. So for attractions specifically, we spent a total of $712.10. Now, obviously we did a lot of different attractions on our trip. We specifically mentioned that we went somewhere where there's a lot of different sites to see. And obviously if you're going to very specific things to see, some of those involve tickets. I feel like everything now has a ticket attached to it and they make you pay to get in and see it. So for us, we spent a lot of time researching what it is that we actually wanted to do. Probably spent the most time researching this in advance, both what we wanted to see and then how to get tickets and buying tickets for those things. Now, again, because they make you pay to get into everything basically, especially in the more touristy cities, Barcelona and Lisbon specifically. In that case, we wanted to make sure we really were picking the ones we wanted to see the most. So we decided which ones were going to be worth it for us to actually pay to go in and which things we could just see from the outside and that would be good enough for us. Anyway, we got to see a lot of really cool stuff with the attraction side of things too. We did Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. That's a big one, more expensive, but really cool spot to see. The Alhambra in Granada, that was probably the top highlight of our trip. Like both of us, when we were thinking about what's the one thing that really stands out, that's the one for us there. It was so nice. We had such a good time. Ultimately, you pay to get in and then you're just wandering around and having a nice walking experience anyway. So lots of good exercise. Oh, we saw a flamenco show, which is a traditional Southern Spanish dance style. That was also somewhat more expensive, but a really amazing memory. So I think we did a pretty good job deciding on what activities we were going to pay for that would actually end up being really nice memories for us as well. Then souvenir-wise, we aren't really big souvenir people. We take so many, way too many photos and videos, so that's kind of the souvenir for us. But we did end up buying these ceramic hooks in Girona, near Barcelona specifically. There's a lot of ceramic stores there, so that felt like a nice tie-in, something for a future home. We got this little magnet from Seville, very small souvenir. And we also bought an umbrella one day that was €5, not worth it at all, but it was pouring rain and we kind of ended up having to buy one in this situation. So overall, including that, because it's still a cost we had on the trip, but even though we didn't really bring the umbrella home with us, we spent $36.96 on souvenirs as well. So our grand total for the entire trip, every category is, drumroll please, it is $9,829.30. Again, that total amount is 15 days of a trip for 2 people. We're really happy with how it turned out. We had a lot of fun, really enjoyed ourselves. Now, even though we really enjoyed ourselves and we're happy with it from that perspective, as people who like to save and invest their money, the total still kind of makes us squirm a little bit, but we know that we saved for it, we budgeted for it, we had a really good time, and we also, luckily for us specifically, get to make content about it with you guys too, so there'll be more travel content coming, more tips, especially in short form as well. So all of that was really good for us.
Now we're gonna be doing another video next week on renting a car internationally, the cost, insurance, getting into an accident when you're not in your home country, all of that. But in the meantime, if you haven't checked out some of our previous videos, make sure you do check them out next door. And yeah, we'll see you next week.